In this quick session, I will give you an introduction into how to organize materials in Fusion 360 so we can share them between projects. We have the Roku base and the Roku control, and we don't want to have to recreate the materials. And I will give you a quick introduction into the built-in render engine, which is not very powerful, but it is very good to create kind of somewhat good-looking design snapshot renderings to document your design process. And then we bring everything into a more advanced rendering for the realistic rendering. So let's start with the materials. We can fire it up, and for example here we say plastic matte, and we have plastic textured, we have the fabric, plastic textured random, and glossy. Let's actually delete all non-used, so you right click and then select delete all unused, and this one I would like to give a specific name. So double click and say this is Roku fabric. This is just an LCD display, so we don't really pay much attention. I don't know why this one is in here. Shouldn't really be there because we're not using it. And here's our plastic that's textured and the glossy plastic. So also here, edit, and then could call this Roku plastic textured. Call this fine, because it is actually let's call this texture. I think it is the same as the remote control. And then here right click, edit, and say Roku plastic glossy. Very good. Before I continue, the remote control is black, so is the base. In the 3D program here, we can select pitch black. Now, that color does not really exist in products, so in real life. So we should actually make this not bright, but brighten this black a little bit up. So maybe a 42. And then right click, edit. I do the same also here, a 42. And I'm just guessing these values right now. We can still later adjust everything as needed. Good. So how do I share this now with my remote control? When I right click, you see add to favorites. Add to favorites, add to favorites, and then my appearance, favorites, there are my favorites. Very good. I'm just closing this one, save, and then I reopen it. So everything is being refreshed. And let's go ahead and open it, and then you will see that the materials there will pop up. Come on, Fusion, open. Tick-tock, time is running. And there we are. Let's press A to start the materials. You see, there they are. Okay. Now, to assign all the materials, I give a little bit of a tip again how we do this. I will go to bodies and simply assign this to everything. Yes, remove. So we're nice and clean. And then here we say delete unused. Very good. Now the Roku fabric goes to there. Very good. The Roku textured goes onto this whole body. That was easy. And then we have the Roku glossy, that's this front face there. We switch to face and then drag it to it. And you see this way actually I got the materials in. Now I only have to create the dial and also the buttons menu. That didn't really exist in this design here, which is why you don't see the materials being shared. So to create this, we can first set this to faces, and then I would like to create a duplicate. I could use here the Roku plastic, edit, sorry, not edit, say duplicate. Then edit, and we say this is Roku plastic matte. Now it's not really plastic, the buttons are silicone, but we can simply treat it as a matte surface. So how do we create this as a matte surface? The reflectivity we can lower a little bit. And the roughness we can increase. So we don't really see anything because the material isn't assigned to anything yet. So let's do that. I go to a side view, then left to right, mouse button, click and drag, select all these buttons, and then we assign the buttons. There, and let's do the same here. Okay, sometimes the selection is a little bit stupid, so I'm exiting in the appearance menu and then press A to open it again. And drag it to it. Unfortunately, in this case now we have this silly thing happening again. Okay, so I hope you notice what happens. Here this will select the whole device and then I get this silly warning, which is not what I want. So cancel, and let's select all this again. So let's zoom in, and if I move my mouse very closely, I sometimes am able to just get the button selected. Or not again. This is really infuriating. So there now. There it worked actually with those buttons. To give this a proof, let's change the color. So you see that there, they're all colorized. Oh great, those were not colorized. So let's do this again. There again, very good. So it's a little bit hit and miss, and be very careful with the mouse. Come on, just highlight the buttons, not the whole body. Okay, I don't want this to take too long, so I might actually skip this step if I can't get this done now. As much as I really like this software for designing and modeling, it has some, unfortunately I have to say that, sorry Autodesk, this really sucks. This is terrible. Okay, so if you only have one tiny detail, one workaround, maybe that was my fault here. So let's do this again. It still happens, so in that case I just simply drag it onto it by hand, and then this way, face by face, I can overwrite the current assigned material. So I will leave it to there for the moment and make this back to 42, 42, 42, and then there we're good. Now we have this dial that needs a color too. So let's make a duplicate, and then we call this one plastic matte maybe dial. And we need to get the correct color. So this is 155, 17, 255, 155, 17, 255. Okay. The rest is exactly the same, just a copy. Let's select all this, cross fingers. There, it selected it and assigned it pretty well. Very good. So, last element, the dials. Sorry, the dial here at the side. And there we are. Goodie. So currently we see these materials and a little bit of the surface structure. If we zoom in, we can even see that there is a detail added, a bump mapping. Now we would like to create a rendering of this. Go to Model and Render. Welcome to the Render module. So how does this work? Here again we can set up and fine-tune the materials. Here we set up the scene. We add some decals, adjust materials, start the rendering. We can switch between fast and slow rendering, and then here we do a cloud rendering. Cloud rendering means it doesn't work on your computer. Later you will get a notification that the rendering is done, and in the render gallery, that's where all the renderings will pop up. Let's click on settings first. So what we have here is the environment, data for the ground, data for the camera, and we have environments. Currently it doesn't really we don't really see much, so let's click on in-canvas rendering. You will see it starts pretty coarse and it gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And the light comes actually from an environment. So what's the environment? Click on background and environment. And then when you zoom around, you rotate around, you see that's the environment. So there are some lights, there are some lights, and this whole thing is on a huge backdrop. So we can rotate the object around and see where the highlights are. If we want this view, but we want to rotate the lights, then we can click on this position icon and simply rotate that three-dimensional image that goes around. And let's say like there. So we just have some reflections there and the rest is fine. Very good. You also see the rendering is kind of slow based on the computer you have, so it takes time to refine. If you click on this in-canvas rendering gear, we can switch between advanced, which looks good, and fast, which gives you a quick preview of how it could look without all the precision. This is actually a good way to start, and then later when you like what you see, we go to advanced, and then it takes longer to render. Okay, let's go back to setups. With perspective, we can switch between orthographic or perspective view. We can change the focal length. So right now 90, this is more like a tele lens. If I set this to 25, you see this is more like a fisheye wide angle lens. 200 is nearly like a 1 point, not a 0.1 orthographic perspective. 90 is okay, so very often I use values between 75, 90, etc. Exposure, if we want to kind of with a photo or a camera, work on the exposure, and we have a depth of field. This works really nice. So click maybe this point. and then where I clicked, that's sharp, and then from there to the back and to the front it becomes blurry, and we can adjust the blurriness here. So now you see that has slight blurriness, so you pay more attention to this element here. And we can turn this effect on off. Super easy. We can also simply switch out the environments by simply clicking or double clicking one of those. We can also load our own, which I will show at one point. Now you see this is not colored in the light information of this environmental image. And maybe let's try out snowfield. Gives it all kind of like a bluish and a slightly yellowish tint for the sun. But how do we set this up so we render this as an image, however, without this environment in the background? So I can go to settings, and the background is solid. Then we can set this as white. And see, it gets all the lights, but the background is now clean. We can have a ground plane or no ground plane. Without a ground plane, we don't get a drop shadow. We can also add a reflection and adjust the roughness. So you see, or you might see a sharper reflection or not. Flatten ground, what does that one do again? I'm not sure yet. And so you can see while this one works, we can always switch out the different environments. Not a big deal. Very good. And we would like to render this. Then you could go, or if you want to save this while you're rendering on your computer, you click on Capture Image. This is all okay, and you can just click OK, and then specify where on your computer you want to save this image. Or you could click Render. You will get the render settings. Now we can specify the size of the image, cloud or local, final quality, 2 credits required, a render. So this 2 credits is, I think everybody has a certain amount of credits, and every time you do a rendering, 2 credits are gone, and that just simply prevents somebody launching 1000 renderings and keeping it to a more normal amount of renderings. So every time a rendering is done, you get 2 credits back. And you see here it popped up, and then at one point they will all be populated here, and from there then we can right click or double click and then save that image locally if needed. If we want to save a particular view, new named view, let's say 3/4, and maybe I go to kind of like this view just for reference, and maybe 3/4 back. Whoops, should have double clicked this one. 3/4 back, and you see it there. This way we can position, specify particular views from where we look into the scene, and then when we have to re-render something, we don't have to try to find that position. We simply click on that view, and then we hit render and create a new image. And that, in a nutshell, is pretty much everything about how to set up the rendering. If you render on your computer, last thing here you have excellent, final, and infinite. When we set the slider, you will see it will continue cleaning up and cleaning up and cleaning up and getting better. But if you don't like the result, then we could also set this to infinite, and then it will just continue cooking and cooking and cooking. At one point you could just say, okay, you're done, pause and save. And with the cloud rendering, that's just maximum quality anyway. Okay, that's it for rendering introduction into Fusion. And then in another video I will show how we can also texture the different elements for the buttons via the decall command.